Hello, everyone. My name is Suzana Simoes. I am in Miami, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you today to conduct our class for today, which is lesson 17. The chapter is chapter 20, and our topic for today is discarnation. So, we are going to start by give me 1 second, by looking at the objectives for today's class. At the end of this class, you'll be able to understand the difference between death and discarnation, the process, define and explain the process of discarnation, understand the difference for the spirit of different types of discarnation, understand what happened to children after discarnation, and explain the Spiritist view on funerals, burials, and cremation. Now, this is an introductory course, so we are going to touch all these topics in a very general and light way. Hopefully, by the end of the class, you have a good understanding about this, but of course, you can seek to deepen your knowledge, and if you wish to do so, here are some of the books that we are using today as a resource for our study. So we have the book After Death by Leon Denis, and there's a particular chapter in this book that we are going to be looking at called The Last Hour. The book Works of the Life Eternal by Andrew Lewis is a book that looks at the discarnation of different individuals. So it gives an in-depth look at the process of discarnation and all the different conditions under which a discarnation can happen. We have Heaven and Hell. There is a specific chapter in Heaven and Hell called The Passage, which has a lot of really great information about the process, and of course our our base, which is the Spirits book. So we will use resources from all of these books to help us to understand the concepts of discarnation. So moving on, we are going to start reviewing some very basic terms. And I'm sure that if you are taking this course and have been following all the previous lessons, we have touched already on those topics, on those terms. However, I feel it's very important that we have a good grasp on what they mean in order to be able to understand the discarnation process. And sometimes it takes more than once listening, elaborating, processing a term to come to a good, solid understanding of what that term means. So, when we talk about universal cosmic fluid, I want you to think about this very basic, primitive element in the universe that gives rise to everything that we know to be material, whether it's the chair that you're sitting, the table where you're leaning on, or energy, electricity, all that is matter, and therefore it comes from the universal cosmic fluid. Now we have the pure spirit, which is also a byproduct of the universal cosmic fluid, and it is the spiritual body. So we have our physical body, we have our spiritual body. It is semi-material, and it is composed of the universal cosmic fluid. Interestingly enough, each planet has its own atmosphere that is related to the degree of evolution of that planet. So when we incarnate, we take some of those fluids to compose our perispirit. So the perispirit is equivalent to the level of evolution of that particular planet. And then we have vital principle, which is also a byproduct of the universal cosmic fluid, and is a specific type of energy that gives vitality. So when you combine the vital principle to an inanimated object, it gives the object life. So this is what gives us life. So we need to understand these terms to get to the process of discarnation, as I mentioned to you. So let's look at the next slide. So let's look at incarnation. I apologize for the format not being kept here, but when we think about incarnation, we're going to think about the physical body. We're going to think about the spirit with its spirit. And for an incarnation to take place, to occur, you have the perispirit, which is the semi-material, energetic body, to bond, to link with the material body, cell by cell. So there is a strong bond that is formed gradually in the process of incarnation between the perispirit and the physical body. Again, these bonds are cell by cell. In addition to that, we are given vital principle that will give us vitality. And the easiest way to think about this is to imagine a car with a tank of gas. So each one of us is given a full tank of gas. Now, some of us have tank of gas. They're the size of like the tank of gas of a big truck, whereas some other ones have smaller tanks of gas. But no matter the size of yours, when you incarnated, it was full. Now, it is our job as we are incarnated to take care of the car and also to manage the gas in the car so that the car doesn't die before its time. Same thing with the vital principle, with the vital fluid. We are going to run out of it gradually, but we can actually replenish some of these vital fluid. And we do so by eating, by breathing, which is the primary source where we gather our vital fluid. Also by exchange, person to person. So when you hug someone with a lot of affection and you give energy to that person, some of the vitality is passed on to that person. In the Spiritist practice, through passes, we give some of our vital energy to the other person who is receiving. So it is our job to maintain the car. So our body, just like our car, needs to be attended to, needs to be taken to the maintenance, needs to be cared for. We also need to manage our vitality. So we don't want to overspeed with the car so that you're wasting a lot of the gas. You don't want to park the car and not use the car for a really long time. That's not good either. You don't want to be accelerating and decelerating. In other words, you want to manage that car in such a way that that gas is going to last for as long as possible. Of course, with the car, you can continue to replenish with gas as long as the car is riding. But with us, although it can be replenished, it gradually decreases until the point that we achieve the years that were possible to live with that certain amount of vitality. So I hope that this image is helpful for you to understand what does it take for us to incarnate. Will make it easier to now discarnate. So let's look at the discarnation process. Discarnation is the process by which the spirit disengages itself from the body by virtue of the cessation of organic life, and still retaining its spirit moves back to the spiritual plane. So like I mentioned to you, it was important to understand what perispirit was. So when we are talking about discarnation, we are talking about the disengagement of the perispirit after the cessation of the organic life. And what this means and what is really important, I want to point out to you right here, is the fact that discarnation and death are two distinct terms. So in the book Workers of the Life Eternal, in chapter 13, we find this sentence about the case of Dimas. To our incarnate friends, Dimas was completely dead. To us, though, the operation was not yet complete. Meaning that for the incarnate, it looked like everything was over because the physical body was dead. However, the discarnation process had not been completed yet. So, what they're referring to when they're talking about this operation is precisely the disengagement of the pure spirit from the physical body, which usually is going to happen a few hours, sometimes it takes days after the physical body is actually dead. There's a cessation of the organic life. Okay, so that's the first point that's important for us to understand. Those are two separate phenomena, although they happen a lot of times concurrently and they're intertwined, they're distinct. Very well. Moving on, we're going to see that the discarnation is a process that takes place gradually. It happens from the toe to the head, and while the discarnation is take place, um, and after the spirit is separated from the body, the spirit will do a review of its life, and also there is a state of confusion that happens. We are going to look now at each one of these processes, and here we have a picture that I thought was a very nice picture illustrating this process of discarnation. I want to highlight here the head being the last point of connection, which we'll cover in a minute. So let's talk about the gradual process. So I really felt like it was important to bring some sentences from these books, really to encourage you to acquire the book and to read the book. So, as far as being a gradual process, we know that the separation, this is Leon Denis, the separation is almost invariably slow, and the extrication of the soul takes place gradually. Sometimes it begins a long while before death sets in and is only completed when the last fluidic ties that unite the body to the spirit are severed. So, first lesson, it's not ever abrupt. So we don't just cut. It's not a cutting. It is a loosening up of those bonds. The bonds become weaker over time. And we will see that when someone dies at a very old age, a lot of times there's very little connecting that pure spirit to that physical body. And therefore, the disconnection is, using another image, very much like when you a fruit that is ripe, it kind of drops to the ground. It was ready to go. There's no force that is actually necessary. But regardless, the process is gradual. The process is usually a slow process. That's the first thing that is important to understand. Then we're going to see that it happens from the toe to the head. We saw the image, everything had been already disconnected. The last thing was the head. And this book brings a very, very detailed explanation, an in-depth explanation of how this happens. Here I put just a very broad explanation, but it starts usually by the solar plexus, where there is a concentration of our physical energies, and the disconnection of the solar plexus will lead to rigidity and cooling of the limbs. So, working with hospice patients, I have been able to witness that many times. We actually know when the death is approaching of the physical body. You look at the extremities, the fingers, the tip of the fingers and the toes, and you see that cyanotic purple color of the skin, and the hands and the feet become very cold, and rigidity starts to set from the extremities. And this has to do with the disconnection of the solar plexus. This is followed by the cardiac plexus, and so the body now starts to decompensate. The heart starts to show signs of fatigue and deterioration, such as arrhythmias. And then, last but not least, we have the disconnection of the coronary plexus, where is all the mental energy is resides, and this usually completes the process. So it always follows this order. Very well. So we learned that it's gradual, then it goes from toe to head. And then now next, we're going to look at the review. So Leon Denis, talking about the review process, he will say, the recompense or chastisement of the spirit proceeds from its own conscience. It comes from within and not from without. The spirit is its own judge. When the vestment of the flesh has fallen away, the light penetrates and the soul is laid bare. Then within it there appear, clear cut as a living picture, all its deeds, thoughts, and desires. So, a lot of religions and a lot of people believe in the final judgment. And what we see in Spiritism is that every single thing that we do, our most important thoughts, our most important deeds, the ones that had a meaningful emotional content attached to them, are imprinted in our perispirit. The perispirit is an archive. So all our deeds, they happen in our minds, they happen in our actions, but they are also imprinted, and they become part of our archive of memories and experiences. So when we are outside of the physical body, all our senses are heightened and are much more expanded and acute. Therefore, we see more, we perceive more, we hear more. Everything, again, becomes very heightened. And we are also able to see ourselves for who we are. A lot of times, when we are in the physical body, there are certain things that we wish to forget. There are certain things that we block, literally, emotionally, not to deal with. But once we are outside of the physical body, everything becomes a lot more exposed because we don't have the physical body to buffer all those feelings, desires, and thoughts. So the review process is a natural part of the dying process. It happens at different times. Some individuals may have it um, shortly after, during the discarnation. For some others who might be a little bit more disturbed, a little bit more confused, that may come a little later. But sooner or later, we all go through this review, which is a necessary balance that we have to do in order to move on to our next stage and give us an appreciation of what we have learned, but also the areas that we need to work on. Then we have the confusion. It's the separation of the soul and the bodies, followed by a period of trouble. Brief for the righteous and good spirit who soon awakens to all the beauties of the heavenly life, but which is very long, sometimes spending years for the guilty souls impregnated with coarse fluids. The best way to think about the confusion is, to me, I always like to use examples and images and ideas. But there was a time in my life that I used to love to take naps in the afternoon. And sometimes those would be like 2 solid hours of sleep. And then you wake up. And you wake up and you were totally disoriented. You don't know if it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Sometimes you don't even know exactly where you are. And this is the state of confusion that the majority of us will experience. The confusion is not always present, but I would say that for spirits in our level of evolution, we can expect some confusion. Again, if we had a lot of knowledge of the spiritual life and has have lived our lives um, in the righteous way, as Denise says, as well as have practiced detachment from the material life, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, then it's more likely that this confusion period won't last so long. For some spirits, it can last a long time. And a lot of times they will have a difficult time understanding, we will see what has exactly happened to them. So, confusion is expected. And here is From Heaven and Hell, still about confusion. The more the spirit clings to material life, the less it sees beyond it. That comes, but nothing ends. The confusion continues. The spirit feels that it is alive, but does not know if this life is physical or spiritual. So, particularly for spirits who never contemplated the afterlife, who had no belief whatsoever, they're going to find themselves extremely alive. They are going to have a difficult time understanding that that body is not the original physical body, and it's going to be very difficult for them for a period of time. Sometimes also the type of death that one experience can add to the confusion. It just makes sense that if we're old and ill, we're expecting that death is going to come. But when death happens in a very sudden way, then it becomes more difficult for the spirit to understand what has happened to him or to her. So, in speaking of that, we will go right into the different circumstances and also conditions under which that can occur and how they play a role in the spirit's state after death. So it is needless to point out that whether death is more painful or less, so depends on the circumstances. So here we have three circumstances which are old age, illnesses, and accidents, and three factors that will affect one's experience, which are culture, knowledge, and moral. And we're going to go over each one of them. Okay, so when it comes to old age, right, it's natural death resulting from the extinction of the life forces due to old age or disease. The disengagement occurs over the time prior to death. So it's favorable, let's put it this way, to die of an old age. Uh, when we think about our aging process and we think about the fact that as we age, we have less vitality, we move less, our body starts to respond to the decrease of vital fluid. So our joints become more rigid, our skin becomes more frail, our bones become more brittle, our nerves don't conduct the signal with the same speed and efficacy, our vascular system as well. In other words, the extinction of the vital fluid starts to affect the physical body. Now, this is important because it prepares us to the last phase of our lives where, in being unable to do so much, we are actually invited to be more. So, this sets the stage and prepares us to enter the real life where it's not material and it's not about what we do, but it's about who we are. And so this allows for the spirit to meditate, to reflect, to review values, to place its mind in such a position that becomes favorable together and along with the decreased vitality, together and along with the loosening of the bonds between the perispirit and the physical cells to make the entire disconnection process easier. Think about the vital fluid as a glue or a chain that keeps the perispirit and the cells linked together. So when the vitality is decreasing, it's like if this glue is being water out and loses its characteristics, its properties, and therefore allows for the loosening of the bonds. And this is why a lot of people who are older and who are near their times, they start having a lot of visions of others who have passed away. Why? Because the spirit is no longer so closely attached to the physical body, and therefore it's able to come and go more easily and able to attune to the spiritual reality more easily because of the loosening of the bonds. Illness will do a similar thing. So in a general way, the liberation of the soul is less painful after a long illness, which has the effect of gradually losing the carnal bonds. So although difficult for us who are undergoing the illness and the family, but it does play a role in the detachment process that will facilitate the discarnation, and the reasons are similar to what we were talking about with the old age. Then we have the accidents. Accidents are a little different. Is sudden and violent death occurring when the organic life is in full flow, causes a painful rending of the soul, and makes it difficult to detach the perispirit from the physical body. Why? Because the body dies when the tank is still with a lot of gas. Let's put it this way. And also, mentally, the person wasn't prepared and wasn't expecting to die at that moment. So it's a shock. It's a shock for the spirit. But here again, it depends a lot. And although we are talking about those things very didactically and in categories, I want to say that there are infinite possibilities in terms of experiences and the uniqueness of one's experience, given all the variables that play a role in this process. Okay, so then we have culture. So the hour of separation is a cruel one for the spirit of him who believes in annihilation. He clings desperately to this life, which is slipping away from him. So imagine, like we already mentioned, someone who does not believe in anything and now finds himself or herself alive, um, with a body that a lot of times the spirit won't be able to differentiate from the physical body. They see the physical body and they don't understand that they are not in that physical body. So that can be very complicated, as well as some cultures, some religions believe, for example, that after you die, you sleep. You sleep, for example, until the final judgment. We have had spirits in our mediumistic meetings who have expressed their frustration with the religious beliefs that they had shared while incarnated, and how those beliefs end up being a disservice for them after they die because they had an expectation of something that was going to happen and it didn't happen. And that was confusing and was also painful. So, whatever you believe, whatever is your culture, will have an influence on your experience after life. Also, the knowledge. So, Denis will say that the knowledge of the spiritual future and the study of the laws that govern discarnation are of much benefit in preparing us for death. They may render our last hours easier, facilitating our liberation and enable us to place ourselves more readily in the new world which opens to us. We can only hope that by studying this, by understanding the process, it will help us to realize when we are outside of the physical body, realize what's happening to us, especially if we are having more of a natural death, we have been sick, we are older, so there's an expectation, and hopefully will be easier for us to recognize. But even with that, the most important factor becomes the moral factor, because you may have all the knowledge and understanding about the process, but the principal cause behind the greater or lesser difficulty of the disengagement is the soul's moral state. The affinity between the body and the perispirit is proportional to the attachment between the spirit and matter, which is most pronounced in individuals whose preoccupations exclusively and solely involve the material pleasures their life offers. So here in heaven and hell, the spirits are telling Kardec, look, even if you had all the knowledge about the death process, but you led a life where that knowledge was absolutely secondary or did not play an active role in the way you lived. On the contrary, you were immersed and deeply attached to the material life, then it's going to be difficult, because this attachment makes the disconnection very difficult. And here I wanted to highlight something, because it seems a pretty extreme um, scenario. And some of us may say, but I'm not that. I'm not someone who lives exclusively and solely for the material pleasures that life offers. But we do, all of us, have very strong attachments to the material life. So I wanted to understand that, for example, attached to one's family is an attachment to the material life, because the family that we have is a material composition. Those spirits do not belong to us. A lot of times, not wanting to leave them shows how little we understand about God's control and protection and presence. Whether we are there or not, there's much higher forces that are taking care of our loved ones. And so a lot of times people say, no, I don't fear because I'm not attached to anything, but I know I'm attached to my family. Well, you are attached to something that is material, because those are individuals who are now part of your family, but in another life, they may be in a different family. They might come back as friends, no longer blood ties. They might come back in different positions within the same family. In other words, it's fair enough that we are concerned and that we love and that we feel the separation, but a lot of times this attachment prevents the spirit from moving on. um, and also, of course, our values and how we have led our life, particularly for the ones who are extremely benevolent and loving. Usually, this separation is much easier and not as difficult. Very good. Going on, there was in Kardec, and now Denis also speaks about that, and I put two slides given the importance of this aspect. Painful to some and full of anguish to others, that comes like a sweet slumber followed by an enchanting awakening. Disengagement is quick, the crossing is easy to him who is already detached from the things of this world, who has fulfilled his duties and aspires to spiritual life. On the other hand, a prolonged agony and struggle await the spirit attached to things of the earth, that has courted only material pleasures, neglecting to prepare for its irrevocable journey. So it is the same idea, with different words. And I think what is important for us to meditate is each day how attached we are to this world. If you were to leave this world tomorrow, how difficult it would be for you to leave your work, your family, your preoccupations, your things, or not, right? So this is a healthy exercise that we should be doing. And when people ask me, how do I better prepare to die? Is by living well. And living well is living by the Christian values, is having our intent set to do our best each day, understanding that this world is the means, is not the end. So it's an instrument for us, for our liberation. We immerse in matter to detach from matter. Okay, now let's move on and talk about spiritual assistance. So you see here a picture with the family members incarnate crying on one side, and on the other side you see already the spirit discarnated, completely detached from the body, with what looks like his mother and other spirits who were there to receive him. So I brought this sentence from Workers of, actually from Liberation, the book Liberation. Incarnates are oblivious to the extension of care they elicit from the spiritual realm. Every time they enter the flesh, we, on our turn, start our vigil. So I just want to bring this up to remind us that whereas we are incarnated, living our daily lives, or discarnating, the spirits are always there with us. They help us to enter the flesh, they will help us to leave the flesh. So, in Workers of the Life Eternal, all the phenomena surrounding death involve the charitable care and support of organizations that offer aid indiscriminately. So, there will always be a team of spirits who will be there to assist with the discarnation process. Sometimes you have more specialized teams depending on who you were, the work you did, how many friendships you granted, how much did you give of your energy to the goodness to others. All those things will conquer some sympathies and affinities from the spiritual realm that will a lot of times come to help us, to receive us. And always, we have the presence of our loved ones who also come to receive us. What happens is that sometimes, given our state of confusion or of guilt or disbelief or not being able to understand what's going on, we may not be able to perceive the help that is being given to us. But the help will always be there to some extent. We're coming to the end and we are going to address two more things. One is the death of children. And before talking about the death of children, let's look with Kardec, because Kardec was like, why do children even die, right? It seems like against the laws of nature, their child would die. So Kardec in question 199 will ask, why is life so often cut short in childhood? And the spirits are going to answer by saying, the length of a child's life can be, for its spirit, the remainder of a former life that had been cut short before its due term. Moreover, the death of a child is often a trial or an expiation for the parent. What becomes of the spirit of a child who dies very young and begins a new existence? So, here, what Kardec is explaining to us is that sometimes we come to life and we cut our life shorter, whether by committing suicide directly, or committing suicide by negligence, or committing suicide as a secondary to our neglect with our own selves and with our lives. We cut it short significantly enough that we need to return to complete that lifetime. And this is what those years are about. But there are also circumstances where the spirit itself does not necessarily is expiating anything, paying for anything, using those terms, which is not really the best terms. But the spirit doesn't need that rehabilitation period, but it does to help the parents because it has a connection with the parents, and the parents themselves are the ones in need of that experience, the very dolorous experience. Um, so, what is the situation of a child after that? So, when the spirit has reached an elevated evolutionary level and has assumed mental command of itself, it acquires the ability to easily disengage itself from the impositions of the physical form, overcoming the difficulties of pre adult discarnation. Then, right after, they recover their form and appearance. So I just want to touch base quickly. We talk about the perispirit. The perispirit is semi-material, is very plastic, and is very sensitive to our thoughts. So the spirit is able to change its form, change its shape by thinking. And so when you are more evolved or you have a good grasp of your mental powers, you are able to easily change your condition. However, we are going to see that this situation does not apply for most children that discarnate. So they are still prisoners of unconscious automatism, are relatively a long ways from self-governance. They rest and are led by nature like babies in their mother's laps. They are unable to undo the ties that bind them to the rigid principles that guide the world of forms. Thus, they need time in order to be renewed. So, translating that to very simple words, the majority of us don't have yet a good handle on our mental powers, on our thoughts. And so, a lot of the times, those souls will remain in their infantile form, attached to the perceptions, how they perceive themselves while incarnated. And they will be taken to special places in the spiritual realm where they will be cared for as long as necessary until they're able to either reacquire their adult form or be guided to a new incarnation. And last but not least, in our final minutes here, let's touch very briefly on wakes, burials, and cremations. So here we have an interesting picture of a man um, grieving, mourning, and the spirits in a cemetery. Does that happen? Um, in the Spirits book, there are some very interesting ideas. One that is important is first to know that the spirits are indeed sensitive to our remembrances. They respond to our thoughts. They are sensitive to our prayers that bless the act of remembrance. So, this is the most important thing. In Spiritism, we usually don't have a lot of ceremonies, nothing external, because we understand that spirits will respond to our thoughts. So it does not really matter if you are at the cemetery, if you are in your house, or at work, it doesn't matter. As long as you're thinking of them and you can actually give them flowers from wherever you are. Remember, with our minds, we build. Our minds are like the hands of the spirit, and they can manipulate the universal cosmic fluid, and they can actually generate objects in a realm that we don't see but that exists. So, whatever it is that we wish to them, we can create with our own minds. And if we focus, they will certainly receive and be touched by our creations. Now, although we don't have a lot of rituals and things like that, look what the spirits tell Kardec when he talks about burying all the family members together in one place. The gathering of mortal remains of all members of a family in one place is a pious custom and a witness to the sympathy of loved ones. If such gathering mean little to spirits, they are useful to humans. So a lot of those costumes don't make a lot of those habits don't make a lot of sense for the spirits per se, but they're still useful to us. There's nothing wrong with them per se. There's no harm in doing them. Sometimes we need them to help us to mourn, to grieve, to process things. But what is important to know is that, again, the most important thing for them is our thoughts and our prayers. And this is our last slide. Spirits regard the body left behind as an all-fitting garment that has inconvenienced it, and which it feels happy to have gotten rid of. The prevailing sentiment at the sight of the body decomposing is almost always indifference, as a thing it no longer cares about. I really want to close with this because the body is something that we overvalue while we are incarnated. But think about a piece of clothing that you use so much, it's more like of a rag than anything else. And when you let go of that piece of cloth, it's like it means nothing to you because it's absolutely done. So for the spirits, the physical body is going to be the same, a garment for which has no longer any use. And so, although it feels weird to us because we are attached to our physical bodies, this is what the spirits share with us in regards to a spirit's experience in looking at its own body. So, with that, we get to our questions. I hope that this was enlightening. It's very brief, but we try to touch, the main points that this course covers. And again, I hope that it made sense. And if you have questions, ask your questions. Does it hurt to die? That is a very good question. So the spirits are gonna say in the spirits book that actually the moment of death, the actual moment, does not hurt. In fact, it feels like a relief, and most of us will sleep to die. So any suffering that we may have, it's more related to what happens before we die than the actual dying process. Let's see if we have any other questions. Can we prove the survival of the individuality? Um, in Spiritism, I think the main proof that we have is the communications. And perhaps you have never seen one, perhaps you are not a medium, but we all influenced by the spirits. And all of us have had moments where, out of nowhere, absolutely out of nowhere, an idea that is completely foreigner to us pops into our minds. And a lot of times that is a proof that that idea didn't come from you because it's foreign to you, something completely out of place, and it suggests that it was whispered by another mind and you capture that message. So through mediumship, through intuition, we can assure that the spirits live on and they remain individuals. They remain who they were. The idea that we go back and we integrate it into a whole only works if we think of this whole as a group of spirits, or if we think, for example, of the vital fluid that goes back to the whole energy of the universe. But because we have our perispirit, our individuality remains. And the perispirit, as I mentioned to you before, it holds the entire archive of our experiences, all our lives, all our learning, everything that we have conquered with our intelligence and with our heart, our personality, our individuality. It's all guaranteed by this physical body that absolutely maintains everything that we are. Do we have any other questions? One more. Can life be prolonged with passes? Yes, it can. Actually, also in the Spirit's book, we're going to find um, an explanation about the vital fluid that says that you can actually provide someone with vital fluids, someone who is actually close to the dying moment, and you can strengthen that body and postpone the moment of death. The vital fluid is very important for any healing process. So, for instance, it is the communication among the organs in the body and in the presence of the vital fluid that will allow, for example, when we have an injury, for that injury to heal because we have vital fluid and we have the whole organism working for to maintain the homeostasis. Now it gets to a point where we don't have enough vital fluid and where the body parts start to break beyond repair. And then that's when death starts to take place, physical death. When we're running off this element, that is a healing element, is an element that contributes for the homeostasis of our body, we're running out of it, and the body starts to break beyond repair. That will lead to the process of physical death that happens gradually and over time. So I think we're done with our questions. So I hope you enjoy our lesson for today. And again, if we have any questions, join us in our live and make sure that you read, seek the literature, the Spiritist literature. There's a lot of information about dying and discarnation.